Dating for looks? I do believe that looks is what's catching my people slipping. And I am convinced that if we don't repair our relationship with what we value men for and what we prioritize when seeking partnership with men, we in danger. Now, when it comes to the conversation about looks and men's appearance, I do find that I'm on my own in this conversation because there are still a lot of women who really value the way a man looks, and I understand. I do believe that it's important to be attracted to your partner. I hear that. I can see why that matters for people. At the same time, it also comes down to what forms the basis of your attraction to other people and what you prioritize when feeling attracted to someone. So, I say all this to say, I don't think it's the end of the world if you are attracted to a man for how he looks, or you're turned on by men who have the abs and they're 6 foot tall and they've got a nice face to go with it. I just think that the more you are swayed by a man's appearance, the easier it will be for men to bargain you out of your worth. And so, when it comes to looks and when it comes to valuing how things appear to other people, there's a lot of work to do. I think there's something key in the conversation we tend to see online about separating the artist from the music. And oftentimes, that discussion is had when we are exposing abusive men in the industry, and the people who tend to say separate the artist from the music are saying that in order to justify still streaming that person's music or to support the idea that they still want to be a fan of an abuser. But I think that example plays a key role in this conversation when it comes to separating the man from his looks. I think it's possible to separate a man from his looks. Now, what would separating a man from his looks even look like? Well, first of all, when we think about what it means to separate a man from his looks, we kind of got two containers, right? We've got one empty container, which is the man. We've got another empty container, which is his looks. So when we start to fill these containers with different ideas that pertain to what the container is labeled as, we can then start to unpack why the two containers exist in the first place. So why is the man in your life? That's container number one. Container number two, what do his looks do for you? So if we start with container number one of why is the man in your life? Because now we've separated the man from his looks and we're just looking at the man. What does he do for you? How does he make you feel? Is he a provider? Does this man create a dating experience with you that feels irreplaceable, wonderful, incomparable? Does this man endeavor to look after you? Is this man reliable? Is there a clear effort on this man's part to be useful to your life? Those are the questions for container number one when we've separated the man from his looks. Now let's go to container number two, the man's looks. What does this man's looks do for you? You get sexual arousal from his appearance. You feel proud to be seen with him because other people identify how much of a catch he is. You enjoy the idea of your man being wanted by other people, but he seems to only want you. You enjoy the idea of being seen out with this man because he makes you appear to be more successful. I'm sure there's a couple other things we can throw into that container of the man's looks, including that he looks like a celebrity you fancy, or his appearance gives other people the impression that you are happier than you are. But when we compare those two containers, the man versus his looks, and how those two containers carry themes that matter or don't in partnerships with men, there is really a lot of opportunity to focus on what matters to us. Because for me, I'm always going to choose container number one over container number two. Container number one being the man himself and what he can do for me, versus container number two being the man's looks and how turned on I am by his appearance. Now, having said that, there is always a grey area, right? Everything isn't going to always be binary. Where I think there's a grey area in this particular conversation about a man's appearance and how that could be important to you is, if the man is taking care of you and you happen to be attracted to him, great news. Great news. I am of the belief that if you are a woman who does happen to be swayed by looks and you are in a place in your life, regardless of age group, where looks really matter to you, then I think it matters to give yourself the opportunity, especially if you're still in your 20s. If you're past your 20s, girl, we have a separate conversation to have, which we will come back to that. But let's focus on the people who are in their 20s, yeah? Early 20s. Not my type of 20s, where I'm on the other side of 25, pushing 30, yeah? I am 20 whole 9. I'm saying, if you're in your early 20s, then I do agree that it's okay to prioritize a man's looks. And the only reason why I say that is because in this life, it is important to try things out so you can see why it doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying that if you're dating a good looking man, then that's it, you're doomed and you're never going to find happiness in your relationship with him and that's it. Oh, goodness me. What I am saying is you have less leverage if the man is as good looking as you are. And yet, at the same time, the reason why I do believe that in your early 20s, you should date a man for looks, you should date a man who hasn't got money, you should date a man who can't do anything for you, is so you can see why it's not useful for your life. And it's so that you can quench that curiosity as soon as possible. Because if you're someone who has never actually dated a man you consider good looking before, then it means if at some point later in your life, and by later I mean maybe your 30s or 40s, which I consider still young, but if in your 30s and 40s, 30s or 40s, you come across a man who is good looking in your eyes and you've never dated a good looking man before, and suddenly this really attractive man is showing interest in you, there's a strong chance that you are going to feel more biased by his appearance. And as a result of that bias, you are more likely to compromise. The compromise will be on what your key needs and standards are because, oh my God, this man is so hot. And oh my God, he looks like Tyrese. Oh my God, he looks like Trey Songz. Oh my God, what's the white boy everybody likes? Do people like Brad Pitt? I don't know. Oh my God, he looks like Tom Hardy or some shit like that. Like, you know, you're more likely to get caught slipping. But if in your early 20s you gave yourself the chance to date the men who are hot to look at, and you've experienced the fun and the frenzy of it all. The fun being that, yes, you are so turned on by your partner's appearance and you love how it feels to step outside and you both look good. And then the frenzy happens where you realize that this man is just trying to compete with you and you find yourself having to chase him, and you realize that it's taking so much effort for this relationship to work because you feel like you have to do a lot to make yourself irreplaceable to this man who can't seem to keep his dick in his pants because he's good looking. You know, you've experienced all of that. So by the time you get to your late 20s, 30s, 40s, you are now focused. Okay, you need to focus. I just think a lot of women are not focused. And that's why you be getting distracted by looks. It is dangerous out here. The streets are not safe. Okay? And what I mean by the streets are not safe is if you, my dear friend, are easily turned on by a man's looks, that usually means that you are also likely to be gullible, because when a man is good looking, we tend to assign more trust and virtue to him than we would to a person who we don't find attractive at all. And that's usually just how the world works. It's the same way that white supremacy works. Like, there is bias in every yarn that forms the fabric of our society, meaning that even speaking algorithmically, there is a bias towards whiteness. And because whiteness is seen as pure and whiteness is seen as the equivalent of the truth, and whiteness is seen as supreme due to colonization and the disenfranchisement of black people and people of color, we tend to feel and form the bias of believing anything that is close to or represents whiteness. And this also seeps into the ways that we interact with black people. So if a black person has more proximity to whiteness, there is a likelihood that they will be believed and trusted over a black person who has much less proximity to whiteness. And it could be that that black person who has less proximity to whiteness, it could be that black person is an immigrant, or that black person has a strong accent, or that black person does not subscribe to the rules of white supremacy, meaning that that black person might have dreadlocks or heavily tattooed or visible signifiers that they have some sort of anarchist streak to them. So where I'm going with this and how this links into the ways we assign trust and virtue to good-looking people is that there is danger in trusting men just because they look good. So when a man looks good, you automatically think he's a good person. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's usually how a lot of people think. And I am not above that line of thinking. It is something that I have to challenge in myself. And it's not a personal failure or flaw if you think in that way. It's literally why the modeling industry exists. If you see a good looking person wearing a particular garment or a shoe, the likelihood is you're going to want to own that piece of clothing or footwear because that person looks so good in it that you believe you're going to look good in it. And this is how influencers are able to sell you shit, because majority of them have either tailored their looks to subscribe to the white standard of beauty, or they we're born that way, and there is a bias that most people fall victim to. And when you fall victim to that bias, your decisions are coming from a place of lack of information. So, when it comes to trusting men who look good, you're in scary territory, and that slope is mad slippery because you assume that because he's good looking, there is truth to what he's saying. Because he's good looking, you're willing to make a bit more excuses for him. Because he's good looking, any compliment he gives you feels more loaded than it is because you want to read into it further. And because he's good looking, you feel flattered that such a good looking man would be interested in you. That the moment his interest wanes or his attention starts to decrease, your self-esteem is immediately impacted. Ask me how I know. Ask me how I know. Honestly, I'm telling you, yeah, I have been there. I'm glad that this happened in my 20s and not later down the line when I'm like, I don't know, in my late 40s. And but the thing is, before I finish what I was gonna say about experiencing a good looking man in my early 20s versus late 40s, there's nothing wrong with your late 40s. Like, there is no reason to believe that you must rush and do all the good things you can do before you get to your 40s. Like, life doesn't end at your 40s. Anyway, why I am happy that I experienced the good looking man who was just words and vibes is now that I have felt what that feels like, one, I can relate to people who are in that situation. But two, what's more important, two, is you're not going to catch me slipping again. You're not going to catch me slipping again. I am so headstrong in my belief in myself that anytime I experience a scenario with a man where I feel that I didn't really carry myself well, or where I notice that the outcome isn't what I wanted it to be, to such an extent that it's affected my self-esteem, or if I find myself in a situation with a man where I left feeling like he got more out of that than I did, that all inspires me to not experience that again with another man. I am so hell-bent on not being taken for a dickhead. And that's what it should be about when you go through things with men, because nobody's above experiencing these things. It happens. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just happens. And experiences can be as neutral or riddled with meaning as we decide they're going to be. So when I have experienced good looking men earlier in my 20s versus now when I experience good looking men, there is a clear difference in how I carry myself. Now, when I come across good looking men, I'm so relaxed. A small part of me is still like, okay, he fine or whatever, okay. But at the same time, my wig is secured. Do you get? My head is screwed on well. No sexy man formed against me shall prosper. Amen. Amen. Because do you know how many times, yeah? And I'm in an industry where there's a lot of good looking men. Do you know how many times I've been in rooms with men who they're like, they're the actor of the moment, or they are a musician who has, been the rage for a while, or they're a model. I'm in a creative portion of the industry where even though I'm an author and I've, made a couple documentaries on telly, I still have this access to the industry where I can weave in and out of spaces that aren't necessarily my domain. So sometimes I'm at red carpet events, sometimes I'm at music events, sometimes I'm at, movie events. I'm in and out, Sometimes I'm outside, but most times I'm at home, girl. Like, I'm not desperate to be seen outside, but the few times when I go outside, it's not usually the actual red carpet event, it's the after party. That's where you need to have self-control. Because that's where there's opportunity for you to get into conversation with people, and you need to know how to carry yourself. Because these men are very used to women being like, oh my God, you're so attractive. Oh my God. And even if the woman isn't saying to him that he's attractive, they can tell from her body language that she is so excited to be speaking to him. So when I end up in these rooms, or when I end up in scenarios where I'm in the presence of a good looking man, I'm so relaxed. It's almost like my brain, my brain generates a Snapchat filter that I put over his face to neutralize his looks so that I can just focus on him as a person. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but it takes insanity to be me. And it clearly works for me. What I mean by this Snapchat filter that I create in my brain is I just see him more as a man who still has a dick and is still governed by his loins, and is still someone who is likely to lead with selfishness, probably not the most accountable person. Even though he's being nice to me right now, I have not spoken to any of his ex-girlfriends or his family members to know what a turd he really might be. So the Snapchat filter I put on his face is more of a cerebral filter that I place between myself and him so that I can funnel the information through that filter and not be biased by his looks. Because babe, if you don't create a filter to funnel information through when interacting with a sexy man, everything's just going to be flowing through the floodgates, and all you're going to be feeling is, this man is fine, this man is so fine, oh my God. And that's how the bias catches you. Now when it comes to dating and good looking men, I think a lot of women, we speak about men being in their ego, but I think a lot of women are in their ego too. The only difference is that women's egos don't cost people their fucking lives, It's men's egos that be costing everyone their lives, including other men. But with women, how our egos cost us is we stay in situations longer than we should, and we choose the wrong men because we are choosing from a place of ego. I think when you go for looks, there is ego there. You care about how things look more than how they feel, or more than how they serve you. So, dating for looks. I'm not a fan of this at all. As I get older, not for me. I have said many times on this podcast that for me to be with a man from now on, especially now that I'm towing the line of 30, right? I'm in the last leg of my 20s. I'm towing 30. I see you over the Himalayas, girl. I see you, girl. I'm focused on leverage and dating, not for looks, but for leverage. Yeah. I'm not saying that you can't have leverage if you date a good looking man. you have leverage, but it'll be the wrong kind of leverage. Meaning that if you're dating a good looking man, and let's say you're the breadwinning woman, yeah, the leverage is that, like, he will probably feel like he should stay longer than he probably wants to because he's getting financial benefit from being with you. So you have the leverage in that sense where you feel like you have some sort of control over him. But the control you have over him is not the authentic kind of control that actually serves you, versus if you was to be in partnership with a man who's not that good looking and he's got more money than you will still have a lot of control because he knows he's punching. He knows he's punching for his dear life to even be with you. And in order for them punches to actually land, he needs to have his shit together because he knows you can replace him. He knows that if you can attract him as a man who has enough money to provide for you and himself, as a man who has enough financial confidence to create the lifestyle that you enjoy, as a man who has enough financial ability to meet your needs and still make you feel good, if you can attract him, he knows you can attract another one of him, especially if he's not good looking. He knows he is replaceable. All he has is what? Money and sweet mouth, which are nice things to have, which are important things to have when you're dating women. But it's important to always believe that any man you're with is replaceable if you are clear on what you value in partnerships with men. Because if you don't know exactly what it is you want from men, you're going to think every man is irreplaceable and, oh my God, I'm never going to have this feeling again. And he's fine as hell too. So it would be such a huge loss if I let this one go because he's fine as hell. And I met him when I was much younger. So there is that bond and I'm not going to connect with anyone in this way ever again. Well, for a lot of people, that's true. You're probably never going to connect with somebody who you met when you was 10 because it would have involved time for you guys to have known each other long enough to be able to say you both knew each other as children. But that's not the only way to form an incredible connection with a man. There are men who you might have met them when you were younger and you really want them to be in your life for the foreseeable because of the nostalgia and how much you value your bond with them, and the reality being that you have really seen each other through life. And that's fine. He can be your friend. He can be a really good close friend. There are male friends I have from when I was in when I was like 16, and I'm still friends with some of them. I have a guy friend who I've been friends with him for like over 10 years. I'm not going to date him just because I've known him for a long time. And he's not a bad looking guy, but I'm not going to date him just because he's been in my life for a long time. I'm going to keep him in my life for as long as I can and as long as it feels good for both of us, because I value the friendship. But it's okay to have long-standing friendships with men. You don't have to like marry the man who you met when you was 9. Because there are men that you could meet next week, yeah? And over the course of time, there is a different kind of bond you can form with them. There is a different kind of care they can show in your life that the guy who you knew since you was a toddler cannot show you. It could be because the guy who you knew since you was an infant ain't got no job, or he's just trudging through life kind of not really doing much of himself. And this is not an insult to anybody who's in that position. Like, sometimes in life, we just be going through things and we are in our situations until we're not. But it's important to cut your coat according to your size. So if you're a man and you are financially struggling, I pray things get better for you. And I also pray that you find somebody who is at your level. Because what happens is a lot of men They punch far above their capabilities by choosing a woman who is making way more money than them, choosing a woman who can replace the little role that they play in that woman's life, and they feel insecure for the whole duration of being with that woman. And because that woman is empathetic and is feeling that man's embarrassment, she now overcompensates by paying his bills and just having him as some live-in sugar baby in her life. And this is not an insult to any women who are in that position, because it be like that sometimes, but it doesn't have to be like that for you. If you're not in that situation, you don't have to be in that situation. Like, if you're not somebody who is currently dating a man who you've known for like over 10 years, then you have freedom and you have time. There are people who you can connect with, and it doesn't have to be just one person. Get rid of this idea of the one, because when you think in that way, that's how looks can keep you anchored to something that was never meant for you. I do notice that happening to women, where they just stay stuck with a man because he looks good, and then it's like, because I love him, but I love him. Oh, God. You know what? The whole "but I love him" thing, I think that needs to be a separate episode in itself. I think "but I love him" needs to be a separate episode in itself, because that phrase scares me a lot. I have met many I've met many women who will tell me something crazy that a man has done to them or has been doing to them for a course of time. And after telling me that absolute whiplash inducing story, they end with "but I love him, so, you know." And I'm like, scary. That shit is scary. This is why you gotta stay vigilant, and this is why you can't be swooned by looks. This is why you need to really decide what your key requirements will be from a man. I know what my key requirements are, and looks is not part of it. I would happily date a very average looking man. He don't even have to be tall. Cause you know what? I've dated tall. Like, I once dated a guy who was 6'8", and he looked like Tyrese in the face. And how old was I? Oh God, I was 23. I had, yes, I remember I just turned 24, maybe like 2 weeks into being with him. I was so unhappy. Oh my God, that guy was just awful. Like, he really enjoyed how I chased him. Because remember, 23, I was baby Slumflower, okay? I didn't know then what I know now. But this is again why I say it's important in your early 20s to just experiment without getting pregnant, experiment without marrying, experiment without legally binding yourself to any man. This guy, 6'8", Tyrese in the face, charming. But I wasn't happy, because I could tell that he was like a bit jealous that I was doing better than him. I remember one time I was going for breakfast with him in London Bridge, and we actually walked past my Adidas billboard, because at the time I'd done an Adidas campaign and I was on billboards across London. So we walked past my billboard in London Bridge, and it was almost like he didn't want to act impressed. Mind you, this guy wasn't even doing that much for himself. I had met him at a tech event. I think it was a tech awards event, and we were probably amongst the only few black people there. And I looked so good that day. I'm going to tell you what I would have done differently after I explain how I met this guy. But I looked so good that day. I still have the dress that I wore. Long sleeve dress, thick hogging. I had my afro. I used to have a really, really massive afro hairstyle, black. Had my afro, face was beat down. And I was on my own. So I saw him and his friend. And obviously this guy stood out because he was 6'8". I hmm, I briefly made eye contact with him and then looked away. That's me. That's how I flirt. You have a fraction of a millisecond to catch eye contact with me. If you don't catch it, then oh wow. So he caught that eye contact, and then he came up to me. He was with his friend. He came up to me and he started a conversation. Asking me what I'm doing here and if I enjoyed the event. And then he told me about what he does. And at the time, he was running a startup, some sort of alcohol startup. It was something about an alcohol tech business. But back then, I didn't know much about tech. I used to just think any guy who works in tech has got money. Oh my god. And I used to kind of think that any guy who like has a startup, oh my god, he's so cool. And the fact that I met him at this event added that level of bias because I was like, okay, if I've met him at this kind of event, then he's serious about what he does, which is objectively true. Like, yeah, I think where you meet people is key context. And he was serious about his work. It's just that he wasn't making the money that would have made him feel confident. And I think he also lied about his girlfriend. He told me that he had a roommate. But when I went to the toilet, there was all women's like stuff in the toilet, and it just looked like this woman. I could just tell this woman was attractive by the skincare that was in it. You know where you can just tell that someone is a baddie by the skincare products you see in the toilet. I knew she was light skinned. I could just tell because of the hair products. I was like, this a lie. This is a lie. Like, how you gonna refer to your girlfriend as your roommate? See how men lie? Men will deny you for some pussy from someone else, But he said it was his roommate. At the time, I was so gullible because I liked how he looked. I was gullible and I believed that. I was like, yeah, I mean, it's possible for an attractive 6'8" Tyrese in the face man to have a roommate who is an attractive light skinned woman and they're not doing anything together. They just happen to live together in this 2-bedroom house with a shared toilet. Anyway, this guy, yeah, he just made me feel like I had to be the one chasing him, and he loved it. He loved it because he was good looking and he's used to getting attention. When you're tall, freakishly tall, this guy was 6'8", 6'8", and I remember one time when I went to his house, he was wearing the grey joggers. He did that on purpose. We never slept together. Thank God we didn't sleep together. That shit ended before there was a chance. But I was so attracted to him. Oh my God, I was acting so desperate. I'm really, really embarrassed telling this story. I don't like talking about situations with past men because it's so embarrassing, but it's important because I don't want people to think that I'm superhuman and that I'm just saying stuff because it sounds nice to say and I'm just so unrealistic in my approach. No, I've lived a lot of mistakes and I've also lived really, really great experiences with men. But when I talk about this 6'8" Tyrese in the face dude, and I think, what would I have done differently? Many, many things. What would I have done differently? Well, I would have maintained the aura that he perceived when he first met me. And that aura that he perceived when he first met me was, this girl is really beautiful and kind of mysterious. Because I didn't really tell him what I do at the time. But then I did that thing that a lot of women do where they want to fast track the connection by oversharing and making themselves over available in the hopes that this guy will just be like, oh my gosh, she's giving me all her time. If I spend more and more time with her, I'm going to fall in love with her quicker. I did a lot of that and it was silly. Like, I remember one time I went to his house. He was living... This was when I was more impressed by a man's like an area he lives in. He was living like literally in Tower Bridge area, like really, really close to the river in Tower Bridge. And I was so impressed by that. So, oh my God. Whole time, I also live by the river, but because I was in such a desperate hurry to be impressed by this man, any little thing he could have done would have impressed me. What else would I have done differently with this 6'8" dude? I would have ignored him a lot more. Because weirdly, as I started to become more like impatient and more complainy, cringe. But as I began to complain more and sort of do that protest behavior thing of like demanding more attention from him, he started to pull away. Of course he would. And then when he noticed that I'm actually not interested anymore, he now started trying to like get my attention here and there. When he saw that a documentary that I'd made had come out, he like messaged me saying he's happy for me even if we're not speaking. I ignored that. For years afterwards, he would still occasionally come to my Instagram to like my pictures. I didn't block him on Instagram. I believe I might have blocked his number on WhatsApp, but he's not blocked on Instagram. If I was to bump into him again, would I give him another chance? Nope, because the likelihood is he probably can't afford another chance with me. And I'm not even being sarcastic. I genuinely don't think he can afford it. There are men who, once they put you in a position where you have to exile them from your life, they genuinely will have to move mountains to get back in your good graces. And for most men, it's not even worth the effort of seeing them try to push a fucking rock, let alone a mountain. I just think that some men deserve to be left in the past, no matter how good looking they are. And I think another thing that catches women slipping is like they want to have it all. But I'm going to expand on it all because it all is subjective. You can actually decide what it all looks like. The bog standard definition of it all when it comes to women dating men is he's 6 foot plus tall. He's good looking in the face. He's got muscles. He's young. He's rich. So when you look at that list of like grandiose signifiers of success and sexiness, I think it is possible to have all things on that list, but will you have your happiness for the long term? And will that man's looks last for the long term, especially if he's not someone who has a job? Because I just feel like, look, if I was to observe that list, tall, muscles, nice face, money, what was the other one? Young. What do I value in that list? I value rich, and I value maybe tall. I value those two the most. Rich and tall. So I don't mind if the guy is not good looking. I don't mind if the guy is not chiseled to the gods. I don't mind if the guy is not young. I've said several times in the past that I don't care to date a man of my age group. And by age group, I would not probably date a man in his 30s. I would date a man from late 40s upwards. Because mentally, I'm a lot more advanced than most men my age. And I feel like if I'm going to date men my age, I have to kind of play dumb. Which is not an issue. It's just that because I'm a public figure, the jig will be up very quickly. That they're eventually going to discover my Instagram, or they're eventually going to come across my podcast, or they're going to hearsay from someone else about me, and then they're going to now enter the mindset of trying to Jedi mind trick me, or trying to sort of see where they can be the exception in my praxis. Meaning that, and this is common with good looking men, I've experienced this several times where I meet men who are good looking, especially in the stage in my life I'm at now where I'm not as swayed by that. But men are always going to try and challenge to see what they can get away with, and I don't blame them for that. But I sometimes meet a man who's good looking, and then at some point down the line, he's going to try and see if he is the exception to my rule, meaning that he might even go as far as, for some razzle dazzle, he might even go as far as saying that he's seen my podcast and he agrees with it and he thinks it's cool and he does believe that women are people and he does agree that women deserve to be taken care of and that he isn't against the idea that men are murderers and women should be more suspicious of men. Men will do all that pandering, but it's because they kind of want to see if you're going to give them some like pussy as a way of saying, thank you for humanizing me. You get 12 strokes of this grippy, tight gooch. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm just not doing that. So what happens is, at some point down the line, they realize that compliments and telling me that they agree with my podcast is not going to be the reason why they sleep with me. And then that usually just fizzles out. So I prefer to date men who are much older, who don't even know my podcast exists. Or if they do know it exists, they're too old to care. Like, they just, if anything, they find it cute. They're like, oh, I love this. You're so cute. You talk your thing, girl. You do your thing. Yeah. Like, they're not threatened because the things I talk about don't affect them. They have money. They can afford to sustain and facilitate a lifestyle that I enjoy. There's no issue. It's only men who can't afford to do that who be coming up with these hypotheticals and what ifs and trying to argue me out of my own rationale, because deep down they want to see if they can argue me out of my way of thinking so that they can have sex with me. I just think that's really amusing how men will not put effort into just adjusting themselves to meet you where you are. Instead, they will try to bring you down to where they are. And it's usually good looking men who will do that. That's why I'm like, don't be jealous of any woman you see who's dating a super good looking man. You don't know what she's tolerating to be there. And that goes for any and every relationship that you might look at and feel a sense of jealousy or fondness over. You don't know what that person's tolerating to be there. Especially if they're dating a really good looking man. A good looking man, they usually get by on receiving attention from women all the time. Even when they're in a relationship with a woman, they still like attention from other women. So you need to decide what problems you want to bring into your life, because the exceptions are, if you're dating a good looking man and you're a good looking woman, usually where the exceptions lie are you're both celebrities or you're both from wealthy families. That's where I can see there being less of a desire for the man to just like act somehow, because he gonna get his ass beat. Not by you, but by your people. But aside from that, like there's also value involved, like for his career and how things appear to other people. So that's why I'm like, don't be comparing yourself to celebrities. Don't try and copy these celebrity power couple things. Like, if you are going 50-50 with a man, you're not in a power couple, babe. You're being exploited. 50-50, splitting bills with a man and still having sex with him and still providing emotional labor and still cleaning up after him. That's not 50-50. That pie chart hasn't been cut properly, and you know this. But you want to tell yourself it's 50-50 so that you feel good about what you've accepted. And I'm not going to challenge that or argue that, because that's your life. I'm going to just wrap this up by saying, good looking men are great to explore in your 20s so that you can see exactly why that doesn't work. And or good looking men are great to explore at any stage in your life, if you know that you are able to completely emotionally detach yourself from them, I think it takes a level of self control that will have been mastered and formulated over the course of years to be able to date a good looking man without falling entirely into it and losing yourself. So if I was to date a good looking man now, I mean, the last guy that I dated was good looking. He was a bit older than me, not much though, like maybe 3 years older than me. Um, Money. He was spending money on me. We had fun. We looked good together. It was that whole. I'm just glad I did that because the curiosity's left my body now. Like I'm not out here being like, oh, I just really hope I can experience that feeling of like dating a guy who's really hot and we both look good and he spends money on me and we're just like, like it did what it needed to do. Like I was very physically attracted to him. He was very physically attracted to me. Um, but it stopped working when I was making myself too available. And even if I completely transformed and altered the way I behaved, it wasn't going to work anyway because he wasn't in a headspace where he was ready to date. He just wanted to escape the feeling of being rejected by a past relationship that didn't work out. So I was a rebound, but at least it wasn't for free. Like I genuinely enjoyed while things were good, they were good. When things stopped being good, they stopped being good, and I acknowledged it for what it was and kept it pushing. I don't go to bed every night hoping that he's having a hard time and wishing that he never finds anybody else so that he can realize that I was the one all along. Like I don't feel that way at all. I just feel very negatively neutral towards him. I know it doesn't sound very neutral, but what I mean by negatively neutral is like the only negativity there is that I wouldn't want to date him again. But I don't feel this sense of like brooding resentment towards him. Like I've given myself the time to process that. The resentment I felt when I needed to feel it has served its purpose. If at all he ever wants to come into my life, because men usually spin the block and they sometimes spin the block more than once because they give years in between. If he ever wants to spin the block, he's just gonna have to give me money, and I'm still not gonna sleep with him. Like he'll have to pay for the forgiveness. Like the more time passes, especially when it's a good-looking man, you have to treat them more harshly, and by more harshly, you have to increase the tax that it will cost for them to receive your forgiveness, because they think they can get away with things because they're good-looking. So as time passes, that fee grows interest. So there's a time when I would have said, oh yeah, for 2.5 grand, I would forgive him. Now we're at 5 grand. Can he afford it? Yes. Would he want to pay 5 grand? Probably not. So it incentivizes him to stay away from me. And it also incentivizes him to really ask himself, do I really want to be with this woman, or am I chasing my own tail that is my ego? Because sometimes men can decide to actually pay the 5K and it's because they've sat down with themselves and decided they do want to be with you. And the fact that you've put that fee in front of them has increased your value in his eyes. And this is not to say that women are solely financially valuable. This is just about how men think. And when you make them pay for forgiveness, they value it more. Wish the world was different, but it's not. Anyway, if you're going to be meddling with good-looking men and they're going to be spinning the block on you, make sure you treat them like they're regular. Treat good-looking men like they're regular, and you will not be walking around like a fucking, what's the word? Like disgruntled woman who is bitter and who feels taken advantage of by men because she gave too much. The better looking a man is, the less you give him. The better looking a man is, the more self-control you need to have, because the likelihood is that that man is so used to getting away with things and having his way that he's going to expect that the outcome will be the same with you. And that's why you need to, instead of trying to prove to him that you're the one, you need to show him why you're not the one.